Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurul Fatina Biha binti Nur Azmi. Today, me and my group mate, which is Group 4, we are going to present our group project assignment, the financial ratio analysis for SP Setia Berhad. I will start this presentation with the introduction part. SP Setia Berhad is a Malaysian investment holding company. In 1974, the company began as a construction firm and it was taken over by Liu Ki Sin, a well-known property developer. Then it was listed on Bursa Malaysia and SP Setia Berhad refocused on property development with construction and wood-based manufacturing as their supporting business. In SP Setia Berhad, there are several committees that will manage the company and one of them is the Finance and Investment Committee, FIC. The primary goal of this committee is to advise the Board of Directors of SP Setia Berhad in carrying out its fiduciary responsibilities in respect to the financial investment and funding requirements of SP Setia Berhad, the company, and its subsidiary, the group. The difference between the company and this group is that the company refers to SP Setia Berhad itself, and the group refers to the subsidiaries of SP Setia Berhad. Our group decided to choose the group financial statement, which means we will refer to the subsidiaries of SP Setia Berhad financial position that has been stated in their Statement of Financial Position 2020. First, we will look at liquidity ratio. Liquidity ratio can be known as a ratio that indicates a firm's ability to pay off debt as it becomes due. This ratio indicates how quickly a company can convert its current assets into cash in order to pay off its liabilities on time. There are three elements that fall under this liquidity ratio, which are current ratio, quick ratio, as well as cash ratio. Current ratio is a method or tool that can assess a company's capability to pay short-term obligations that are due within a year. It will determine how much of the short-term creditors' demands are supported by current assets. The formula for current ratio is calculated by dividing current assets with the current liabilities. As the result, the current ratio of SP Setia Berhad for 2019 is 2.27, which means they are able to pay their current liabilities by using the current assets for 2 times in a year. It shows that SP Setia Berhad has RM 2.27 in their current assets for every RM1 in their current liabilities. It is similar for the year 2020, where the current ratio for that particular year is 2.18. This means that SP Setia Berhad has sufficient current assets, which RM 2.18 for every RM1 in current liabilities. Since the current ratio of SP Setia Berhad for both years is considered good, then they need to maintain their efforts so that their future current liabilities do not exceed the current assets. Next, quick ratio can be used to measure a company's capacity to meet their short-term obligations without relying on sales of inventory or prepayments. The formula for quick ratio is calculated by deducting current assets with the inventory and divide it with current liabilities. As the result, the quick ratio for year 2019 is 1.33 and it is increased in the year 2020, which is 1.35. This result shows that SP Setia Berhad performed well in these both years since the quick ratio is higher than 1.0 and they have sufficient of quick assets to cover their current debt. In order for SP Setia Berhad to maintain their company's quick ratio performance in the future, they can boost their sales by increasing promotions and discounting, which will result in an increase in inventory turnover. Cash ratio is used to assess a company's ability to cover all the current liabilities without having to sell or liquidate additional assets. The formula for cash ratio is calculated by dividing the cash with the current liabilities. By referring to the slide, it shows that the performance of SP Setia Berhad under this cash ratio is not good, since the cash ratio for both years is below than 1.0, which is 0.25 for 2019 and 0.24 for 2020. This means that SP Setia Berhad does not have enough cash to pay its short-term debt obligations since their current liabilities is greater than their cash in both years. In order for SP Setia Berhad to increase their cash, they can focus on improving their inventory. Next, we will look at the second ratio that has been discussed in this group project, which is leverage ratio. Leverage ratio are used to determine the relative amount of debt a company has accumulated. This ratio will indicate how much debt the company is using to fund its investment. High leverage is linked to a higher chance of insolvency and can be the greater risk to the company. There are three elements that fall under this leverage ratio, which are debt ratio, debt to equity ratio, and times interest earned ratio. The debt ratio is a measurement of how much of an asset's value is financed by debt. It is used to determine whether or not a company is solvent. The formula for that ratio is calculated by dividing the total debt with the total assets. As a result, the debt ratio for both years, which 2019 as well as 2020, is quite good since it is below than 1.0. This means that SPCity Berhad has greater assets compared to their debt for both years. In order for SPCity Berhad to maintain their performance under this ratio, they can increase their revenue by increasing the sales and also restructuring their debt by refinancing its existing debt. Debt to equity ratio shows how much debt and how much equity are used to fund a company's operation. If the debt to equity ratio is less than 1.0, the company is considered to be less risky compared to the companies with a higher debt to equity ratio. The formula is calculated by dividing the total debt with the total equity. As calculated in the slide, it is clearly stated that the debt to equity ratio for 2019 is 0.91 and for year 2020 is 0.98. Normally, a debt to equity ratio of less than 1.0 is deemed healthy. In order for SPCity Berhad to lower their debt to equity ratio, they can pay down any of their loans. SPCity Berhad also need to ensure that their total debt is always below or less than the equity value. Times interest earned ratio is used to measure of a company's capacity to satisfy its debt obligation based on current income. It shows the company's capacity to cover the interest owing on debt commitments. The formula is calculated by dividing the earnings before interest and tax with the interest expense. As a result, the times interest earned ratio for 2019 is quite high, which is 2.57. This shows that performance of SPCity Berhad under this ratio is quite good for that particular year, since it will indicate them possess a lower risk of insolvency to investor and creditors. However, in 2020, the times interest earned ratio for this company is 0.91, which is lower than 2019. This is not good for this company because companies with a times interest earned ratio of less than 2.5 are deemed to be at a substantially higher danger of insolvency and financially insecure. In order to overcome this issue, SPCity Berhad need to issue that or employ equity as a source of cash to properly capitalize their businesses.
Hai, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Ashah binti Atan. I will explain on the next ratio, which is profitability ratios. Profitability ratios can be defined as a method of financial metrics that are used to assess a company's ability to generate earnings. Usually, ratios that show margins represent the company's ability to interpret the sales into profit at various stages of measurement, while ratios that show returns represent the company's ability to measure the overall efficiency of the firm in generating returns for its shareholders. Under the profitability ratios, there are 5 elements, which are gross profit margin, operating profit margin, net profit margin, return on assets, and return on equity. The first element of profitability ratios is gross profit margin. The gross profit margin ratio shows the percentage of sales revenue that the company keeps after deducting all direct costs associated with running the business. The formula for gross profit margin is calculated by deducting direct expenses from net revenue, dividing the result by net revenue and multiplying by 100%. So, as you can see from the slide, the gross profit margin for SPCity Berhad in 2019 is 29.39%, indicates for every RM1 sales, SPCity Berhad is able to generate RM0.2939 sen of gross profit, while in 2020 is 20.36%, indicates for every RM1 sales, SPCity Berhad is able to generate RM 0.2036 of gross profit. It can be concluded that in 2019, the company has more cash to pay their indirect and other expenses compared in 2020. The suggestion that can be proposed to SP Setiausaha Berhad in order to increase their gross profit margin is the company can get a big purchase discount when they buy their inventory from the manufacturer or wholesaler, where they can cut down their cost on purchasing the inventory. The second element of profitability ratio is operating profit margin. The operating profit margin ratio shows the percentage of profits that the company makes after paying for variable costs of production such as wages, raw materials, utilities, and others. The formula for operating profit margin is calculated by deducting operating expenses from gross revenue, dividing the result by net revenue, and multiplying by 100%. So, as you can see from the slide, the operating profit margin for SP Setiausaha Berhad in 2019 is 15.48%, indicate for every RM1 sales, SP Setiausaha Berhad is able to generate RM 0.1548 cents of operating profit. Meanwhile, in 2020, a ratio of 4.85% indicate for every RM1 sales, SP Setiausaha Berhad is able to generate RM 0.0485 cents of operating profit. It can be concluded that in 2019, the company is making enough money from its ongoing operations to pay for its variable costs as well as its fixed costs compared in 2020. The suggestion that can be proposed to SP Setiausaha Berhad in order to increase their operating profit margin is the company can reduce their cost of sales or operating expenses, but still, the company need to consider the company's situation. The third element of profitability ratio is net profit margin. The net profit margin ratio shows the percentage of profit that the company is able to produce from its total revenue. The formula for net profit margin is calculated by dividing the net income with the net revenue of the company and multiplying by 100%. So as you can see from the slide, the net profit margin for SP Setiausaha Berhad in 2019 is 11%. Indicates for every RM1 sales, SP Setiausaha Berhad is able to generate 0.11 cent of net profit. Meanwhile, in 2020, a ratio of 7.57% indicates for every RM1 sales, SP Setiausaha Berhad is able to generate 0.0757 cents of net profit. It can be concluded that in 2019, the company is able to keep its money as a profit that can benefit the shareholders and also to pay the company's debts compared in 2020. The suggestion that can be proposed to SP Setiausaha Berhad in order to increase their net profit margin is the company can generate more revenues by keeping their revenues constant and lower the company's expenses. Move to the fourth element of profitability ratio is return on assets. The return on assets ratio shows the percentage of net income by total assets during a period by comparing net income to the average total assets. The formula for return on assets is calculated by dividing the net income with the total assets of the company and multiplying by 100%. So as you can see from the slide, the return on assets for SP Setiausaha Berhad in 2019 is 1.44%, indicates SP Setiausaha Berhad earned 0.0144 cent for every RM1 of its asset. Meanwhile, in 2020, a ratio of 0.80% indicates SP Setiausaha Berhad earned RM 0.008 cents for every RM1 of its asset. It can be concluded that in 2019, the company is able to squeeze more profits out of its company's asset compared in 2020. The suggestion that can be proposed to SP Setiausaha Berhad in order to increase their return on assets is the company can reduce its inventory costs by managing the levels of inventory to reflect the company's sales expectation. The last element of profitability ratio is return on equity. The return on equity ratio is a profitability ratio that measures the ability of a company to generate profit from its shareholders' investment in the company. The formula for return on equity is calculated by dividing the net income with the shareholders' equity and multiplying by 100%. So as you can see from the slide, the return on equity for SP Siti Berhad in 2019 is 2.75%, indicate of SP Siti Berhad earned RM0.0275 for every RM1 of its equity. Meanwhile, in 2020, a ratio of 1.59% indicates SP Siti Berhad earned RM0.0159 for its RM1 of its equity. It can be concluded that in 2019, the company is able to manage the shareholders' equity so that it can turn into a profit for the company compared in 2020. The suggestion that can be proposed to SP Siti Berhad is, in order to increase their return on equity, is the company can reduce its asset by deploying idle cash. By holding idle cash, it can reduce the profitability of the company as measured by return on equity.
Assalamualaikum and good day to Madam Sharifah Fatihah. My name is Nur Aisyah Azrin binti Muhammad Zainuddin. So for my part, I will explain on our findings for the efficiency ratio. Efficiency ratio is a measure to determine the efficiency and capability of the company in utilizing their assets in order to increase the sales and to gain high income. There are 5 considerations that need to be analyzed before the company able to determine either they are highly efficient or not. That consists of inventory turnover, average collection period, total assets turnover, receivable turnover, and fixed assets turnover. As for inventory turnover, it is the amount of time that passed between the day a company buys an item and the day that it sells it. A complete inventory turnover means the company sold all of the merchandise that they order, minus any item lost due to the damages. So successful firms often have many inventory rotations every year. However, this varies by industry and product type. The formula to compute this ratio is by dividing the cost of goods sold with the inventory. So as been shown in the slide, inventory turnover for SP Siti Berhad in 2019 is 0.16 times, while in 2020 the inventory turnover is 0.15 times. This shows that SP Siti Berhad has the high sales and fully utilized their inventories in 2019 compared to 2020. As for the suggestion, SP Siti Berhad may increase their sales through the promotions in order to deplete their stockpiles. Also, discounts may help them to clear their inventory in a shorter period and may be an effective approach for promoting the customers' loyalty. Now, as for the average collection period, it is the average number of days between the credit sales was made to the customer and the number of days that the firm able to collect the debts from the debtors. It is also representing the efficiency of the collecting process, and the lower it is, the shorter the business cash cycle, which has a favorable influence on its profitability. The formula to compute this ratio is by dividing the account receivable with the sales and multiply by 365 days. As shown in the slide, the average collection period for SP Siti Berhad in 2019 is 67 days. In 2020, SP Siti Berhad took 96 days to collect its debts. This indicates that SP Siti Berhad is more efficient in collecting payment in the year 2019 compared to 2020. As for the suggestion, before granting credit lines to clients, SP Siti Berhad should do a detailed analysis on them to look either they are capable to pay their credit within the time given or not. Next is total asset turnover. Total asset turnover helps the firm in measuring their effectiveness in using all of its assets. It is also the indicators that shows the ability of the firms use the assets in producing sales in their operation. The higher ratio is more favorable because it shows the firms use their assets with full efficiency. The formula to compute this ratio is by dividing the sales with the total assets. As can be seen in the slide, in 2019, SP Siti Berhad able to generate 13 cents of sales for every ringgit of its assets, while in year 2020, SP Siti Berhad able to generate sales of 11 cents for every 1 ringgit of its assets. This shows that the efficiency to generate sales by utilizing the assets has dropped over a year. To curb with the ineffectiveness in utilizing the assets to generate sales, SP Siti Berhad is advisable to increase its sales by having more development projects, by promotions, and by quick movement of the finished goods. Now I will explain on the receivable turnover. Receivable turnover ratio used to measure a company's ability to recover accounts receivable or money owed by customers or clients. This ratio measures how effectively a firm use and manage the credit that they provide to their clients. A high receivable turnover ratio may suggest that a firm's account receivable is efficient and that the company has a high number of excellent customers who pay their obligations on time, while a low receivable turnover ratio might be caused by poor collection, insufficient credit policies, or clients that are not financially worthwhile or creditworthy. The formula for the computation of receivable turnover is by dividing the sales with account receivables. As stated in the slide, in 2019, it can be interpreted that SP Siti Berhad collects its receivable 5.22 times on average in the year. This means SP Siti Berhad converts its receivable to cash 5.22 times or 5 times in 2019, while in 2020, SP Siti Berhad collects its receivable 3.68 times on average, means the firms convert its receivable to cash 4 times over the year. This indicates that the ability of SP Siti Berhad to collect the credit sales from the clients has reduced. The suggestion that may be given to SP Siti Berhad is that they are suggested to having a strict policy in terms of making payment to their clients. The last consideration for efficiency ratio is fixed asset turnover. Fixed asset turnover is commonly used to measure the operating performance of the firms. This efficiency ratio compares net sales to fixed asset and assesses a company's capacity to generate net sales from its fixed asset investment, which include property, plant, and equipment or PPE. This ratio is computed annually to represent how effectively a company, or more precisely, the company's management team, has leveraged these significant assets to create revenue for the organization. The formula to compute this ratio is by dividing the sales with the fixed assets. As shown in the slides, in the year of 2019, SP Siti Berhad generates a sales revenue of RM6.11 for each RM1 invested in their fixed assets, while in 2020, SP Siti Berhad generates a sales revenue of RM4.57 for each RM1 invested in their fixed asset. This could be seen that in the year of 2019, SP Siti Berhad is slightly more efficient in utilizing their fixed asset compared with the year of 2020. The recommendation that could be suggested to SP Siti Berhad is they need to optimize their inventory management by improving and sustaining the company's cash flow through computerizing the process of order processing, inventory control, and also the billing.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sajdatun Aqilah binti Nur Azizi and I will continue presenting market ratio. Market ratio measures the investors' perceptions and judgments toward the firm's growth and potential. It plays a role by evaluating the economic status of publicly traded companies and can play a role in identifying stocks that may be overvalued, undervalued, or price-friendly. A wide variety of market value ratio are identified, include earning per share, dividend payout ratio, price or earning ratio, PE, and dividend yield. The first element under the market ratio is earning per share, EPS. Earning per share is the ratio of the company's profit that will be allocated to every shareholder of the company. To find earning per share of a company, we can use the formula of net income available to income statement divided by number of ordinary share that is issued. Earning per share of SP Setia in 2019, which is 0.0512, is a lot higher compared to earning per share in 2020, which is negative 0.0289. Earning per share that is plunged is because of movement control order due to pandemic of COVID-19 that hit the country in the early of 2020. As for the recommendation, the earning per share of SP Setia Berhad may be enhanced if it earns more or expands its margin by cutting costs. The second element of market ratio is dividend per share or DPS. Dividend per share (DPS) is the amount of dividend received by ordinary shareholders for each unit of ordinary share held. In order to get DPS, we can use the formula of total ordinary dividend divided by the number of ordinary share that is issued. From the table, it shows that there is no dividend per share of SP Setia as the company does not declare any ordinary dividend to shareholders. As for the suggestion to increase the dividend per share in the company of SP Setia Berhad, the management should aggressively increase the performance of the firm in order to gain the high sale and high return that may increase the profit of the company and will lead the dividend paid to the shareholders. If the firm is doing well and cash flow are rising, there is greater opportunity to pay the bigger dividends to the shareholders. The third element of market ratio is dividend payout ratio. Dividend payout ratio is the proportion of earning that is distributed as dividend to the shareholders in the company. To get dividend payout ratio, we can use the formula of dividend per share divided by the EPS that has been found earlier. From the table, it showed that the dividend payout ratio in 2019, which is 0.8887, is higher than dividend payout ratio in 2020, which is negative 0.3460. The shareholders of the SP Setia get more dividend in 2019 than 2020. Same goes to this ratio if SP Setia Berhad wish to increase their ability to distribute high dividend to their shareholders. They need to perform well in the business operation, where they have to make many sales that give high return. As the effects from the profit gain in the company, they will able to distribute the dividend to each of the shareholders, either ordinary or preferred or preference shareholders. The fourth element of market ratio is price earning ratio or PE ratio. PE ratio is the relationship between the market value per share and earning per share (EPS). Earnings in the company is important when valuing a company stock because the investors want to know how profitable a company and how profitable it will be in the future. From the table, it shows a lot of comparison between the price earning ratio of SP Setia in 2019 and 2020. There is positive PE ratio in 2019, which is 31.25 that indicate positive future performance and will get high performance expectation of investors, contradict with PE ratio in 2020 when they got negative 34.26. In order to increase the PE ratio of SP Setia, they advisable to produce novel productivity solutions, since the investors are ready to pay a premium for possibly high earning ratio to allow them to have high PE ratio. The last element of market ratio is dividend yield. Dividend yield is the return that shareholders will earn on the shares that they have in the company. The formula to find dividend yield is the latest annual dividend divide the market price per share. From the table, it shows that the dividend yield of SP Setia in 2019 is higher than 2020, which is 2.8% over 1.01%. The dividend yield in 2019 able to sustain a stable dividend distribution to its investors than 2020. To improve the capability of SP Setia Berhad in distributing the dividend to the shareholders, SP Setia Berhad always need a new strategy to recover the company from loss. This is because once the company able to recover the losses, they may raise the dividend. At the same time, there will be more investors who will be interested and attracted to invest in the company, which may increase the capital of the firm.
In conclusion, it is clear that due to the current pandemic of COVID-19, it is highly affecting the calculation of the financial statement for SP Setia Berhad, especially in 2020, where the company shows a slight decreasing in terms of financial performance and its ratio. Most of the company's projects are delayed in 2020 because the government implemented Movement Control Order MCO that not allowed any development projects to be conducted during that period, and it is gave big impact towards the company's operation as well as the company's financial statements. So we believe SP Setia Berhad has come up with the mitigation strategies to be implemented in order to increase their financial performance in the next few years. So I think that's all from our group. Thank you so much.